Welcome to Jews on Film. My name is Harry Adensasser. I am a former Jewish film major and a current Jewish film podcaster. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Zana, video editor, documentary filmmaker, and I'm running for class president. So please vote for me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the laughter. Sometimes Harry doesn't give me much, so I'm trying out new things every episode. And we are joined today by Ginna Green and Lynn Harris from the Bintel Brief podcast. Welcome. And
thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're here to discuss Olivia Wilde's film, Booksmart. So before we get into the plot and everything about the film, I wanted to start out by asking you a few questions. And this could be for either of you. So first off, why did you choose this film? Whoever chose it.
I believe that was me. Yeah. First of all, I loved it. And I remember when I first watched it, seeing the writers and being like, oh, likely Jew, likely Jew, likely Jew, likely Jew, before I got into the film. And then all the Jewishness came full through to me. So I was like, it felt like the perfect film for Jews on Film to discuss.
This is the perfect place to discuss it. I wanted to also ask as a follow-up question, sort of what was your relationship to Jewish film growing up?
My relationship to Jewish film for most of my life was Woody Allen, right? Like, like Woody Allen, like that's like, you know, his body of work. I mean, say what you will about the man and what we came to know, but I mean, you can't separate him from like Jewish, like he is so much of it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Woody Allen. And then, you know, side of Mel Brooks, side of the type of humor in, you know, like anything with Alan Arkin or even like The Russians Are Coming, like that kind of silliness that was just this side of Monty Python, if that makes sense, like, which to me doesn't feel Jewish, but there's something a little like just this side of like on the sort of reality fantasy utter silliness divide was for me the more Jewish stuff, like The Russians Are Coming. That one I keep thinking of.
Yeah. Interesting. I think that's such an interesting answer because it, you know, raises something we always think about with these films. But, you know, to you, does a Jewish film, is it something where there's sort of overt Jewishness, maybe in the cast and crew, maybe in like the actual content of it? Or to you, when you think of the concept of Jewish film, and we obviously don't have an answer, we debate that every episode, does it feel like a sort of a sense of humor, a certain energy, a certain moral ethic to the actual film? You know, have you thought about that at all?
I think about it all the time, honestly.
And it's both
like,
and.
Yeah, totally.
It's all of the above.
Exactly. And it's also like not just because, and we all also know that there are so many Jews in entertainment who made entertainment that was not Jewish, you know, that was just work, right? Or just inspiration in
not
some
explicitly.
Other, like, let's think of all the Christmas songs, you know? So it doesn't just mean that like, oh, I can tell someone, like not everything made by a Jew feels Jewish,
right?
But there are many things that feel Jewish that aren't explicitly, they don't even say the word, like the word Booksmart, which I mean, like the movie Booksmart, which, you know, doesn't even have even the sort of incidental. I was thinking about Love, Simon, where like the guy is just happens to be Jewish and they just happen to have a Hanukkah scene, which I loved because I mean, I'm like, you know, stealing the talking stick now, but Ginna knows that I talk about this all the time. There's like so few representations in pop culture of mainstream liberal Jews just doing Jewish things, and it's no big deal. You know, it always had to be, you know,
without a Strymel and Payas, right?
Exactly. Right. It had to be either that or it had to be like, it's always the thing where the observant person comes into the ER and can they give her a pig valve?
Right.
Like,
I remember that.
It's not a thing, you know? So like, right. And, you know, where is the images of just like a couple of Jews lighting Hanukkah candles and there's no jokes about how like Yiddish is whimsical, you know, like and so I appreciated that in Love, Simon and other things that are starting to happen. But when we were growing up, speaking for myself, that was not a thing. So the Jewish films that we had to love were the ones that either were Jewish or felt Jewish.
Right. things like Fiddler and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Which we still have not covered. So, you know.
Oh my God. Well, you can have my kids on for that one, because I remember at the very end, we watched the old one, you know, and at the very end, they're like, you know, they're leaving, they're singing Far From the Home I Love, and everyone's, you know, we're all a mess. And my kids were little, and one of them, they're leaving, they're going to, you know, Siberia. And one of my kids says to us, "What, but don't they have cell phones?"
Love it.
As the tears flow.
Oh man. Well, thanks. It's good to have that context as we kind of like dive deep into the film that we're talking about today, Booksmart. But I do feel like it's time, Harry. It's time
for the IMDb summary.
That's it.
I will get us going. So it reads.
A little thing for that, I think.
What's that?
The IMDb summary, and like I'll look like a slate or like a
sure.
We'll add in like an effect. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so here it goes. The IMDb summary. On the eve of their high school graduation, two academic superstars and best friends realized they should have worked less and played more. Determined not to fall short of their peers, the girls try to cram 4 years of fun into one night.
Pretty accurate summary, don't you think?
Yes.
I'd say so.
Yes.
Awesome. So everyone, hang on. We'll be right back. We'll take a quick break and we'll discuss the plot of Booksmart. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with Lynn Harris and Ginna Green of the Bintel Brief podcast to discuss Booksmart. Harry, you want to kick off the plot for us?
Yeah, sure. So the movie starts out and we're introduced to our lead characters. It's Kaitlyn Devers playing character of Amy. Beanie Feldstein is playing Molly. And basically the movie opens up. Amy picks up Molly on their last day of school and we kind of are introduced to them. We learn about their bedroom, their friendship. They have a real, you know, amazing sort of bond and energy to them. And they go to school and it becomes immediately clear that they are the people like the real, I mean, they're the book smarts, right? The bookworms are the people that really care about that stuff. And they're in a school full of people on the last day of high school who very reasonably, you know, have stopped caring about any work, have stopped caring about anything. And, you know, we get a handful of comical scenes. You know, in one scene, Molly, who's the school president, tries to talk to the principal about, you know, handing off the finances for the student budget next year to like the incoming president. And he's just like, and he played by Jason Sudeikis is just like,
gosh, really? Like now? I mean, why don't you do it with Nick, you know, please? I mean, he's the vice president.
Nick? We both know that Nick only ran for VP because they planned the dances. That position it's basically a popularity contest. He's useless.
Ladies, it's the last day. You know, we did it, huh? We got you through high school. Can't we just graduate, head off to college, you know, celebrate this wonderful achievement, and let's focus on getting through the rest of the day without anything
I'm sorry, are you
horrible
shutting the door on
happening,
us? Because that's not subtle.
clearly, you know, these two characters just care about this stuff more than anyone else. And we see they do have one ally in the school. They have a teacher, Miss Fine, who they're very close with, who does the crossword puzzle with them. And we see kind of their relationship. And, you know, Miss Fine gives them her number to kind of chat, you know, beyond high school. But we're kind of established, you know, who these two students are basically apart from the rest of their school. And we go through the day a little bit. We kind of meet up with them at lunchtime. Amy talks about having a crush on a fellow student, Ryan, and they don't know if Ryan is, you know, out as gay, but Amy is. And there's this question of, you know, Molly's trying to push her to pursue her. And, you know, again, we're just kind of building the world a little bit. We're learning these relationships, but the real sort of drama of the movie starts up a couple scenes later when we find Molly. She goes to a bathroom and she goes to the bathroom, and basically while in a stall in one of those sort of classic, you know, bullying setups, she kind of is witness to overhearing the cool kids in the school basically talk down about her, and they're being, you know, very rude to her and talking about how, you know, none of them would ever want to hook up with her, and that, you know, she's cares way too much about school and it's ridiculous, and she's, you know, no fun, and she's so boring to talk to. And, you know, Molly kind of takes this all, I wouldn't say quite in stride. She's clearly hurt by it, but kind of storms out of the stall and announces, you know, well, I'm going to be going to Yale and I'm going to be doing way better than the rest of you. So, you know, you can have your fun, not caring lives while I'm going to be successful. And one of the threads that we kind of had learned about earlier was that in that school, they had a policy in place where they don't discuss what school they're going into. So her kind of admitting this was the first time that she was talking about it, and she doesn't know where anyone else is going. And it's kind of revealed very quickly that the three, you know, jock types that we see in the bathroom all themselves got into great schools, including one of them who actually is in Yale also and is going to be a classmate of Molly. And Molly kind of learns this, and it shatters her entire belief system. You know, she had this belief, I can't have any like fun. I can't do any of this schoolwork. Any of this sort of outside of schoolwork. And I have to focus on this because I'm going to do much better. And for her to kind of be met with this realization that other people in her school were able to both have fun and also do it sometimes, you know, as well as her, sometimes almost as well as her in terms of, you know, getting into schools, kind of sends her into this, you know, major tizzy. And we could stop there with that sort of major realization that sets off a lot of the plot.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a good place to stop because that's sort of our inciting incident. She sort of realizes that all is not what she imagined. I wanted to work backwards maybe and sort of say like the people that you called jocks, Harry, it's very interesting. They're not like traditional jocks. I didn't see any Letterman jackets in this film. They're all kind of like alternative cool, but very popular.
Yeah.
And I loved that it wasn't, it was just all sorts of different people in the film. Like everyone looked really like modern, and, you know, you compare it to like Clueless where everyone kind of looked the same. Clueless was another film that we covered before, but also takes place in high school in the early 90s. And I'm like thinking about
Beverly
the two
Hills, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
So that's different in terms of like how people are looking and showing up. Just wanting to throw that out there.
I mean, I grew up in the Valley, so this to me felt closer than Cher's high school experience in Beverly Hills, which was also a little bit exaggerated. But I thought it was a great way to open it. I love the opening. I put in the notes here the dancing scene where they're dancing with the carpool. I just loved it. I mean, the fact that they're so simpatico, that they are like finishing each other's dance moves and handing it off, and the bumper stickers on the beat up Volvo. I'm here for it. So yeah.
That was the moment that I knew I would love the movie, because that is the moment you know that this movie is not going to make fun of those characters.
Right.
Yes.
That like we knew instantly that they're like more like you know for like just in like from the jump that they're going to be like the dweebier ones or whatever. But that dance scene was so loving and they were so sweet, and we knew that it was not going to be a movie that makes fun of its nerds.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was highlighting like that the joy of nerddom too.
Yes.
And when I was watching it for the first time, I was like, oh shit, this was like me in high school, except I didn't go to a big public school. I went to a small prep school. So like I was surrounded by people who were sort of like me, but that was me. I was the kid who took over the newspaper in junior high and nobody wanted to fucking do it with me. So when I put out the newspaper by myself, everybody was like, Ginna, oh my God. So like, I know what it's like to be the overachiever. And it was great to see overachievers get to be in the spotlight like that.
Did you also try to run the finance numbers with your principal on the last day of school?
No, on the last day of school, junior year, I got pulled into the principal's office, the headmaster's office, with my yearbook co-editor, Megan, he told us, one of you guys has to give up a publication because between the two of us, we monopolize the yearbook, the lit mag, and the newspaper.
Incredible.
And so he was like, one of y'all's got to give it up. That's what I got called. Right. We were, yes.
You're like Paramount or whoever, CBS.
We were a media conglomerate in 1995.
Monopoly. Yeah. I want to jump in on some of the comparisons we were making to Clueless, which I think is a good counterpoint, but there are better ones, I think, from that era of these sort of, 90s films that have like what we're responding to, I think, these sort of classic caricatures of the jock types and the nerd types and the way that all of those are kind of like looked down on in different ways. And I think this movie is very intentionally subverting that from the get-go. Like we were saying, the way that it's so sympathetic to our two, sort of nerd types, and the way it's really, encouraging them. But even these you were fair to call me out on that sort of jock type, and no one saw it, but I did put it in quotes. So I kind of was aware of that. Exactly, for the podcast. But I agree with you, because I think, even in that scene, it's revealed like they were successful at getting into school, but later on in the movie, like they're also very kind, sympathetic characters, obviously with their flaws, obviously their issues, but I'll get into this now because I had something that I was going to say, but the sort of, Booksmart, the name is a big, question, like where does it come from? And obviously it's these characters are Booksmart, they're developing their street smarts, but, I definitely think there's a big part of like the judging a book by its cover. And I think that starts with, Molly and Amy and the way that they see everyone else, because they just assume everyone else is like, I think the characters that we've all grown up watching, in older like movies and stuff. But this whole book is just unraveling the layers and not subverting it. It's not that everyone is the opposite of who they are, but it's that you can be both. You can be cool and popular and enjoy partying, but at the same time be a good person, a good student, and go further. And I think that's all just established and subverted very quickly in those opening scenes.
I think, Harry, to your point, you were talking about layers. I think that that's one way to think maybe of what makes a film feel Jewish or Jewy, right? Is multi layers, right? And having sort of like a little comedy stuff going on, right? Like different types of conversations happening at the same time. Turns, like we saw the development of some of these characters over the course of the film, right? Some of the jock likes, we get to see a different side of them over the course of the time too.
Right. 100%. And the other thing I think is that we sort of feel, I think, is Jewish sort of from the get-go. And when you start to see, even in that first set of scenes, including the inciting incident, when you see that they're nerds, but they're not losers. Yeah. It's not like Glee, where there's absolute divides. And they're outsiders, but they're not entirely, like they know the other folks talk to them and they have sort of feisty comebacks. They're not like, and they actually engage with each other, Amy, Molly and the other ones. And you can tell from looking at the way they've cast Beanie Feldstein, like you can just tell she's supposed to be Jewish. They don't make it a thing. Yeah. But regardless, she's the consummate there, like social outsider. Like she doesn't have the athletic body look, you can be an athlete with anybody. Let me rephrase that. She doesn't have the, classic tall and thin, typical blah, blah, blah.
Which they reference in the later Barbie scene, of course.
Right? Oh, yeah. Exactly. And she's a social outsider she looks and acts like a social outsider, which is like the paradigm of the Jews, like she's in the mainstream, she's at the school, she's in the regular mainstream public high school paradigm of social outsider, but still part of it, and so I don't want to sort of spoil the ending yet, sure. but I think as a starting point, we'll see how that evolves. We've hinted at it, right? But as a starting point, that's to me like the minute she walks in, she doesn't just like look like an individual or feel like an individual Jewish character. To me, she feels like she represents the Jews, in that way, in that inside outside persona.
Love it.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. And I think just that sort of people of the book and that, that concept of the Booksmart, of the very scholarly, like that is her kind of silo that I agree with, that she kind of finds herself trapped in, that she represents. And, a lot of this movie is about her kind of learning to explore life outside of it without ever giving that up, without ever abandoning that sort of core of who she is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I should mention that the movie is loosely inspired by this picture book called Kate and Mona in the Jungle by Amy Aitken. And so I kind of read through the book, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But essentially, it's a story about two girls who go out in the jungle with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches packed in their bags. And then they find an elephant at the museum who is a statue, and it comes to life, and it takes them through New York City, through the desert, and then they go to the jungle and encounter all sorts of animals. So I thought that sort of device of being able to go from point A to point B in a series of different scenarios, like really translated nicely into this film. And so to sort of segue clumsily into our next couple of plot points, after Molly discovers that everyone is going to this really prestigious colleges and things like that, and going to Google and stuff like that, they decide that this is it. We're going to be like them. We're going to party. We're going to have fun. We're going to have our cake and eat it too. So they decide that they're going to go to Nick's house. This is like an end of year party. Problem is they don't have the address to Nick's house. So they're going to figure out, how to get there. It's a bit of a mess, but so they're doing a sleepover at Amy's house, and Amy's parents, played lovingly by Lisa Kudrow and Will Forte.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Great.
Just yes.
So good. I love it. They call up their friend Jared, who's played by Skylar Gisondo, a Jew. Jewish. I looked it up. His name is Jared.
Also a Jewish character, but we'll get to that.
Right.
Oh yeah, exactly. So they call Jared, who's sort of in our telling of the story, at least, he's this very affluent, out of touch kid, or at least, there's all this stuff about him. It's again, what we were talking about, reading people by judging the book by their cover, right? So he presents as this he's always got the chains on and he's got these extravagant outfits. And they, so Jared picks them up and takes them to a party, but he takes them to his party, which is on his yacht. And, he's got gift bags filled with iPads and he's playing DJ and he's got waiters and, Amy and Molly.
Was there an ice sculpture there?
There was, yeah. Yes. An ice tiger, I believe. Yeah. And it turns out that they are the only ones at the party because his friend Gigi is there, who we'll talk about in just a second. I want to touch on her. She is supernatural and something else, I think. That's my read on it. But, they are a little confused as to why there is no one else here, but they end up hanging out. They eat strawberries from Gigi. Gigi force feeds them some strawberries, which we later find out are dosed. And, ultimately their goal is to still go to Alan's house, but Amy says, or Molly says the magic word Malala, which is their code word for you need to trust me on this. Yep. Please, let's go. So I'll stop here because I did want to talk. There's a few other scenes that I want to touch on, but let's pause here. And let's talk about the boat scene. Lynn, you were just talking about Jared. Could you want to touch more on that about how he's portrayed?
I mean, in the wrong movie, in the wrong hands, he would have been a nightmare anti-Semitic stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
But to some degree, he's that. But but because it's done beautifully, first of all, he's fully that guy from Jewish Youth Group.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Fully that guy. And in my case, growing up in New England, that guy was Adam Sandler. Fun fact.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, actually Adam Sandler.
Story. That's a whole other story. But,
cool.
We'll have to run this through legal before we air it. But in any case, but that guy who's like the guy who's always like, oh, Josh, like that guy.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. We know that guy. Yep.
He's that guy. But and so again, in the wrong hands, disaster, I would have, left or paused or, paused whatever, sent back my rental, whatever it is.
Sure.
But he's and there's even that scene, and it's even Jews with the money, right? There's even that moment where he's like, yeah, money can buy you love, but because it's already so, his first scene is so adorable as opposed to, grating. I mean, he is grating, but you root for him. He's like a hilarious anti-hero that the movie treats with love, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the sympathy,
the shirts, they like the Escher shirts. But in any case, he even says that thing about money can buy you love, but you just have so much pathos for him. You're you just have all this Rachmanis because you're like, okay, where are your parents? This is what you learned. You're doing your best. You're so nice. The whole, oh my God, this scene
is
with
very nice.
Charles Sandberg.
Some tunes going.
Random House Audio presents Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead by Sheryl
That's
Sandberg
embarrassing.
with Nels Ovett.
I have this thing where I like to hear the words of powerful women before I party to remind myself of the respect and awe you ladies deserve.
Internalizing the revolution. I got pregnant with my first child in the summer.
Well, get some peppy going. We'll get this party started, huh?
And he's not slick. So he also doesn't read like one of those guys who just, reads Adrian
like
Rich.
Andrew McCarthy or like Rob Lowe.
Exactly.
Catherine McKinnon just to get laid. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Sure.
Anyway, so I just think that that's one where I think Subvert is again, they haven't flipped the character, but they've taken a character and given it more than 3 dimensions.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They've nuanced it with him, and the sympathy is engendered immediately. He comes on scene and right there, that he's that guy, but he's that guy, but not quite that guy. Know that. And the script and his acting just gives, he plays the hell out of that role.
Yeah. He's a sweetie. I think he's also has this sort of baby faced look to him where he doesn't have this threatening pervy vibe that some of these Breakfast Club and the Rat Pack era or Brat Pack era, actors had. I think, he's just very innocent. For me, I read Gigi, who is his friend, as this sort of, I was telling Harry, she has this almost supernatural Dybbuk vibe because she just she ends up, for context, she after giving them the strawberries, she just like chit chats and she has like a really hard time on the top deck. They're smoking a cigarette and then she just like jumps off the yacht. But then she comes back later on several times throughout the film and she's just like this presence that just is always there.
Right.
Inexplicably.
Yeah.
Respect for the film for no payoff. Like no answer, respect. They were just like, she's just a Greek chorus, who just is always there. Greek chorus is the wrong thing because Greek chorus tells you to do the right thing. She's a different kind of influence.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that you mentioned that because I was also like, Dana, you called her a Dybbuk, has a lot of negative connotations.
Sure.
And like part of my read of her was like this almost guardian angel that's kind of pushing them along their paths because it's there's no obvious, positive influence necessarily.
I mean, she drugged them.
Yeah.
Against their will. Awful.
Like a guardian angel.
Like a mischievous demon. I don't know.
But that's the right guardian angel for the purpose
to get messed up and get in that headspace. Sure.
Exactly.
That's exactly where I was going to go with that, which is like, her actions are very questionable, but she absolutely like pushes them in directions of like confrontation, that drugged hallucinogenic scene. Like obviously it's awful to drug someone against their will, out of context, but like in the movie and the whole sort of journey that they go on, like that brings up some of their most emotional conversations. And that's where they kind of confront their own insecurities. And that brings up, the conversation where Molly later admits to her feelings for Nick. Like a lot of that is motivated by this person who's just everywhere always. And like,
he's like the one in the fairy tale with the pouch of magic beans.
Right. I was going to say she's sprinkling things throughout the film. And yeah.
Well, we're introduced in that first scene. She has her magic powder, which like is obviously supposed to look like cocaine. And she says that it's her vitamins. And that powder kind of explodes in the faces of Molly and Amy and pushes them on. It starts them on their journey. Like it is that magic powder. She really is this angelic character. She reminded me of this sort of figure that's involved in that my friends and I all know kind of when I spent the year studying in Israel in yeshiva, there was this rabbi who was famous for literally being everywhere all at the same time. Like we called him the teleporter Rebbe for that reason, because like you could be visiting your friend at some yeshiva, hanging out, he's there, he says hi, and he knew everyone. He was like, to his credit, I don't know so much about him, but he was so friendly. He said hi to everyone, whatever. But you would see him at one yeshiva. You'd go on a bus for an hour and a half, end up in like, Jerusalem downtown, whatever. And he'd be there already, just kind of hanging out. Whoa. Like really same as the Gigi vibes. And I don't have an answer for you there. Like that's just one of life's mysteries. People used to say maybe he was one of like a triplet and like they were just people who went around. I don't know, but that's the vibe that Gigi got.
The way you tell it, it sounds like Teleport is a village in Latvia. So he's like the teleporter rabbi.
He's the teleporter. Exactly. That's probably where the name comes from for sure.
Amazing.
But my read on someone like, that's kind of informing my read on Gigi because like he wasn't this nefarious person. He was this amazing person who we just said maybe his, goal in life was just to be a familiar face for people and friendly and everywhere. And that's why he was everywhere. So Gigi, like she's just sending them on their journey. She's supposed to be this sort of mysterious. Her methods aren't obvious. She's not on the nose saying, you two should really talk about, whatever the journey that you're going on. But in her own way, she really is that sort of, catapult for almost every major step of their journey.
And you could argue. Go ahead, Ginna.
I was just going to say that, Jared and Gigi feel like the most misunderstood.
Oh, totally.
Like they're like they're the reflection that is out there in the world is the least truly reflective for them than for any other character. And so them being sort of the agents of the journey, literally and figuratively, right? Like they're in Jared's car, right?
Yeah.
At certain like at key points. So that it feels right that they're the ones who are sort of making that possible.
Right.
Yeah. Sure. The way it's a journey reminded me, I mean, obviously every movie is a journey at some level, but there's a sense in which like we were talking about like the Jewish films of our childhood and all that stuff and classic Woody Allen, whatever. This is in one sense, this movie is really a road movie. It's a buddy movie and a road movie.
Journey, definitely.
Which is not a Jewish, like I don't like a lot of the Jewish quote unquote air quotes on a podcast movies that we talked about are very much like I would say like drawing room movies, where like people talk a lot at brunch or people talk a lot at Katz's or people talk a lot in their on the Upper West Side in their apartments with really long hallways and
rent controlled.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I mean, obviously.
Of course.
And so in that sense, and all of their, getting from point A to point B from the pizza, the pizza guy and it's that's one sense in which it's not constructed as some of the other movies we might consider classically Jewish, right, because they rely more on talking than plot and action and journeying.
Yeah, I think that works perfectly with what you were saying earlier about Molly sort of being this figure, this stand-in for the Jews, because she seems like the type that wouldn't have gone on a crazy journey like this, that probably would have, what was their other plan that they wanted to do instead? They were going to like watch something like at home.
We were going to watch that Ken Burns thing. The Death Poll can wait, bitch.
But that's like, because that's what they want. They want just a night in talking about this movie, taking in this content like that. I agree with you, would be much more of the sort of Jewish construct of this film. And a lot of this movie is kind of pushing them out of their comfort zone and sending the otherwise sort of Jewish, more insular character onto this, journey that like was never supposed to be a journey. It was supposed to be an Uber ride straight to the party. And it just becomes this, endless night that, we're only a quarter of the way through.
Right. That's what I was going to say is let me blaze through a couple more of these set pieces.
Setting you up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Speaking of ride shares, after Jared's party, they get an address from Alan and they hop into a ride share. And it turns out that the driver of their car is their principal. I guess on their way over, they decide to watch some porn so that Amy can learn how to be with another woman because she hasn't had that much experience, which is something, again, Booksmart, reading the book as it's covered. Like, I think there's a lot of people in this movie who we assume have done things or are a certain way. And the more we think about it, they're actually not this way. So there's like a funny scene where they're playing porn on the speakers, love it. I think that when they show up next at this sort of murder mystery party, we obviously get to enjoy the drama nerds. I love all that. It's amazing.
Also Jewish, back Noah Galvin, partner of famously Jewish Ben Platt.
No, totally. Yeah. I think this is sort of where the strawberries kick in that they've had previously. And I believe they wake up and they discover that they're Barbie dolls. So they're both kind of walking around in this room, looking at themselves in the mirror, sort of walking around like dolls and having these like deep sort of discussions, like you mentioned, Harry, about themselves and finding out a little bit more about themselves. But I thought that was like a fun set piece. And then from the murder mystery party, they are trying to do more research, and really their ultimate goal is to find out where Nick's party is. They still have not found it out. But, they're going to this library, they're opening up books and maps and things like that. And then one of the characters just like takes out her phone and shows a video of Theo is punching a bunch of pizza boxes. And then they realize that they can go to the pizza store and maybe ask the person directly. So then they make their way over to Lito's Pizza. Mike O'Brien, who's like a former SNL cast member and writer. And I believe he created AP Bio. It's a pretty funny guy. And so Molly and Amy decide that they're going to cover their hair in sort of a ski mask situation, which is very, very clumsily thought out, this whole thing. And he calls them out on it. But essentially, he is forced under duress, but not under gunpoint, to give up the address of where Nick's house was, where the party is and everything like that. And after he gives them the address, I think they're like, oh, great. Can we have a ride? And he's like, no, get the fuck out of my car. I thought that was like a very like funny sort of, you are children. What are you doing in a car? I actually have a gun for people. You should not be doing this. Get out. And so then they call Miss Fine, who's like the cool teacher, played by Daily Show correspondent Jessica Williams. And, she sort of gives them a pep talk. They have a chat about things and, she gives them these like beautiful outfits. So they are able to change out of their, I believe we haven't mentioned before, but they are on this whole sort of quest so far. They're wearing these sort of very basic blue jumpsuits, sort of Rosie the Riveter vibe, very just like, utilitarian outfits. But then when they assume their final form in this sort of like shiny outfit situation, they roll up to Nick's party and they are all dressed up to the nines, ready to confront their crushes and make things happen on the last night of school. I will pause here and let's have a little chit chat about all the stuff that I talked about so far and any thoughts leading up to Nick's party.
Miss Fine, also Jewish. We don't know. A question mark.
We don't know.
Oh, because of the name. Oh, yeah.
Because of the name. That
interesting.
Yep. Thought about that. I love Jessica Williams, and she can do no wrong.
She can do no wrong. I love her.
She can do no wrong. The only thing wrong with her in this movie is that she didn't have enough in this movie. I mean, she was great. I'm curious. I have a question for y'all in terms of, you said, Daniel, that you really enjoyed the scene in the car with in the lift, right?
Oh.
And I'm like, did everyone find that scene equally amusing? I'm just curious if everyone found it super funny. You really liked it.
I mean, I thought it was like a fun gag because I feel like a lot of these, like, I feel like if you're a teen watching this movie, there's nothing more embarrassing than like watching porn, and especially having your principal be the driver. That's like this sort of cringe humor. I think that sort of sentiment of being like so embarrassed by like sex and just being, I think that to me was like the funny part. I was once in high school, and I understand just this sort of, this sort of nervousness about it. And, having your parents, we talk about that later on with the panda bear and the mom kissing the panda bear on the face and stuff like that. So that happens later on, and they have a similar, reaction to it. But I think, the principal of your school, the awkwardness of it all sort of was the funny part to me. Yeah.
Laurie Kilmartin, the stand-up, has a hilarious joke when she talks about, she says, I'll paraphrase, I won't get it as good as her, but as good as she does. But she says, she has a teenage son, and she says, people ask me, what'll I do if I catch my son watching porn? And the answer is, I'm going to sit down and watch it with him. Obviously she has some tags and add-ons about how like that'll stop him,
right. Exactly.
Every time he sits down to watch it, he'll, anyway.
Here's mom. And the reason why I asked that question is because I think for me as a parent of teenagers, I had I've been sort of lamenting that kids these days can find videos and tutorials. Sure. They don't have to suffer like I did and old folks and sort of learn this shit on your own without a video guide. There was a little part of me that was like, I sort of saw it in that moment, watching it happen, like, oh, that's actually true. My kids don't have to wait and fumble and guess. You actually can get pretty explicit instructions and tutorials these days that were not possible before now.
Yeah. I think the movie is like, and I think this scene plays into it, but it really is making the case for these people who are so book smart and who know how to research really well and know how to go to the library and can, pull up the porn whenever they want to watch it. Like, I think it's making the case for it actually living out in the world and having that experience, like they don't walk away from that scene kind of solved. And obviously when we actually see the sexual scene that happens later in the movie, like she clearly, Amy clearly hasn't, figured everything out yet. Yeah. So like, exactly. So I think the movie itself is kind of jumping in there and saying like, these people are so deterred, so predisposed to think about how they can research it, because like you're saying, everyone has phones in their pocket. They have the internet, they have libraries. There's so much access to all this information. And I think this scene plays really well with the, later scene in the movie to say that you got to have that real experience, and some things you can't create and you can't actually understand by watching it on your phone.
Yeah. Right. You can't learn everything from a book or
from a book.
Yeah.
I also just like the idea that now is the time when you're in the car with your principal to like pull this up is just like so far-fetched and like ridiculous.
Well thought out.
Yeah, like totally. I mean, I saw like the moment he like handed her the cable and she's plugging it. I'm like, easy. I thought there was going to be some sort of Bluetooth hijinks, but it was a direct plug-in situation. And it did not go well.
I will say I'll give credit to, Olivia Wilde, because, the director of the film, because she, as anxious and awkward as that scene could be, she gives us one last beat where the principal kind of says like,
was that Cardi B?
A relief I felt that he didn't know what they were watching, and then he kind of just like let them. I was like, oh, thank God. And that was, I felt like that was like a nice treat from Olivia Wilde. So thank you for that.
He didn't know, or he just like very skillfully gave them sort of a dopey out. Like he let himself.
That's a good read. Yeah,
coming out.
100%.
Like
so Amy and Molly are finally at Nick's party. I think they arrive. They're kind of surveying the scene, and I just like love that Molly has this sort of like dazed look in her eyes as she sees Nick for the first time in this way in her attire. And then she has this sort of love. I love this sort of dance sequence where they're just like like tangoing with each other and the lights. And it was just really like so well done. And it was just very like, for those who are, not or have not seen the film yet, this is like such a beautifully shot and executed and choreographed scene. They're both like silently like ballet dancing and tango dancing and just like very romantically dancing with each other.
But it's also a little hip, it's not just like transformed into Paris in the, 1890s.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's still modern. So it's
in that house. Yeah.
Real, but also fantasy. And like my heart soared, I have to tell you, it's just the best.
Yeah. And you get the sense that Molly's a person who's never let herself feel that way. I mean, she says it earlier. It's like, I can't like Nick, like maybe my body can crave him, but like, I can't actually do that. And it's like the first time she lets herself get caught up in it. And it's such a beautiful expression of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think at this point, Molly and Amy have identified their respective crushes. Amy's going to go talk to Ryan and Molly's going to go talk to Nick. So initially, Nick and Molly are playing beer pong and they're kind of flirty and chatty and I've known you since you were a kid in third grade and and she really feels like this is it. Like this is going to happen. It's finally happening. And then he says, he excuses himself and he says, okay, you stay right here. I'll be right back. And he disappears. And then so we see Amy and she's talking to Ryan and they are sort of flirtatious and hanging out. And it's good to
doing karaoke.
What was her wording? She said something like,
I'm so stoked you're here, dude.
Thanks.
I've always wanted you to come out.
Oh, I am out. I came out in the 10th grade.
No, I meant like come out and hang out on the weekend.
Then Amy decides like, this is it. Everyone is going outside. The clothes are coming off. Everyone's just jumping in their underwear into the pool. And so this is sort of her mikvah moment, her purification. She's going to jump into the water and she's going to be, ritually purified, jumping in and like, it's very like otherworldly. She's, jumping in the water. We go underwater with her. There's this like nice angelic lighting and it's you just see like legs and arms and bodies just flow by. And she's just in amazement of what's going on. But she does come to the surface and she does see Ryan, who is Amy's crush, and Nick making out, who is Molly's crush. So the crushes are hooking up with each other. And so Amy realizes that the shit hits the fan and she puts on her dress and she's going over to Molly and she says, this is it. I'm calling Malala.
Yeah. I just wanted to spend more time on this scene because there's a lot of the party. We'll break it up because there's so much to cover here. Yes. But that underwater scene, and you right away, you were like reading like the midrash and like with the text, the textual reading. She jumps into
there's
the water.
There's no other way to read it in my book.
Exactly. But the spirituality, the mikvah, I completely agree with your read of that. I mean, first of all, that scene is, I think, spectacular. I was watching the movie again, the other night and just like was so transfixed. Like it's so well shot. We didn't even talk about this, but the use of music in this movie, like there's just a lot of, what we call like needle drops that just like come in. And this scene in particular, like I can hear it right now. It's so cool. But there's this amazing moment where like, Amy runs out with Ryan to the pool and they're going to go swimming together. And it's almost like, we don't know how much time passes, enough time that Ryan was able to jump into the pool, find Nick and start making out with him, which could have been a minute, who knows? But Amy kind of, instead of just following Ryan, kind of forgets about her and just like enjoys herself in the water and is just kind of like, like you said, angelically just swimming through, like looking at everyone else's legs, kind of just, you have this moment of like release. She feels comfortable. She feels confident in herself. Mm-hmm. She feels like this person. And, like you were saying, Daniel, I agree with you completely that it's this rebirth, and in some ways, the idea of water rebirth could be, there's a Christian read of it. There's obviously, a Jewish sort of mikvah read of it, but whatever it is, it's like, that at this point, she is not, the meek person she was before, throughout this entire journey, I'd say her more so than Molly was really like at every turn saying, this is over. We're not going to the next house. Like we've been to a party. We don't need to go to the next party. And then Molly was like, no, we're doing this, like whatever. And every step she kind of, wasn't into it. And all of a sudden, whatever, in this moment, it's transformative. I don't need to say the same things over and over. I thought it was a spectacular scene.
Totally.
And we don't know when Amy jumps in, Olivia Wilde knew, right? But we don't know. And Amy didn't know when she jumped in that she would come out of that pool a different person.
Right.
She very hesitantly kind of follows Ryan in.
Exactly.
I think this is sort of, Amy is trying to tell Molly, who still is not aware of what's happened. She is blissfully unaware. She's waiting at the ping pong table for her love, Nick, to come back and sweep her off her feet. But Amy knows that that's not the case. She invokes the Malala Code. I believe this is her first time, but Molly had invoked Malala before. Is that correct? Am I getting that right? This is when the shit hits the fan. They kind of have an argument with each other. And unfortunately, like, everyone is just silently observing and filming with their cell phones. You see those lights in the background. It's brutal. I was like, what is going to happen with these videos?
This for me was worse than the lift scene. You know, the lift scene with the porn. Yeah, that was awful and uncomfortable. I could not even watch this fight scene because you see around the room, you know, one at a time, everyone's face kind of perks.
It was a one shot too. They're just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was all this stuff that's been pent up in their minds and hearts forever. And they just kind of let it all out. You know, I'm not going for the summer to Botswana. I'm going for a year. You always boss me around. It's all this stuff comes out, and it's
again a question for everyone here. Going into the party and at the beer pong table, right? When they're like, did everyone have that sense of, oh shit? Right. We all did. Everyone have the sense of like, this is like, is this going to work out or is this not going to work out? I'm curious what you were thinking, like when you first watched it.
I love that you ask it because I really did feel myself getting carried away with, I think, like Molly. Like, Molly is a character who's never been to a party, has never really spoken to Nick outside of school, and is having a conversation with him probably like for the first time ever. And you see it in her mind, you know, when they're playing beer pong and they have undeniable chemistry. They're definitely flirting with each other.
So charming.
But and you just get the sense that she is just like, this is going to happen. And like when ultimately he hooks up with someone else, like, I think objectively we should say, I mean, that's who this guy is. Maybe he has a relationship with Ryan that goes back further than, you know, an hour. And I'm sure that they know each other. And like, it didn't make sense that all of a sudden Nick and Molly would be, you know, the perfect couple. But I totally felt myself getting carried away with it. And when the rug is sort of pulled out from under Molly, like I felt it pulled out from under me as well. I was like, oh yeah, no, I get it. Like that wouldn't have made sense. But But like, I didn't want to believe that they wouldn't end up together.
Yeah.
No, that was where I was the Greek chorus of like, I enjoyed her enjoyment when they're flirting with you because you're right. It wasn't, he's not a predator. You know, you do not get like, you know, I did not, as a woman, I did not get predator vibes from him. But I also knew, like, I also felt like the Greek chorus going, warn the maiden, warn the maiden. You know, like I knew that he was going to be like, anyway, bye. Or worse, they were going to hook up. And then later he'd be like, oh, yeah, Molly, I just thought it was one of those like romantic things. And I'd be like, bro, you know, so in that moment I was like,
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And for you listeners, I was
describe what you were doing with your hands.
It was nervous hands.
Right.
Jazz hands.
Yeah. For sure. After this epic fight, Amy goes to the bathroom to sort of like blow off steam and just take a minute. And she's just relaxing, washing her face off. And then it turns out that Hope, who is played by Diana Silvers, also a Jew. In this film, she's playing the mean girl. We don't really see too much of her throughout, except at this end scene. At the beginning, you know, she's sort of making snarky comments to Amy and Molly. But they have a little chat with each other. And I think out of nowhere, Amy's like, this is it. This is my shot. So she goes in. She plants that first kiss, and then they end up like hooking up with each other.
Another great needle drop. Great song there too.
What was the song? Do you remember?
What was this?
It's this guy, Cautious Clay. I forget the name of the song, but I know that like my sister, shout out to my sister, got really into it afterwards. And she's like, oh, this is the Booksmart song. And now whenever I watch that scene, I'm like, it actually is a good song.
I think this is probably the demographic for you, Harry. I feel like I'm a little too old to recognize some of these songs.
The song is called Cold War, and great song.
Okay. So this is the Cold War song that Harry
fitting.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think you know, they hook up with each other, and it's a very clumsy sort of romantic situation. I feel like it's very opposite from like the normal romance scenes where like it's very passionate and then the sheets go over and then we fade out. It's not that at all. It's like the awkwardness. It's the uncertainty. How do I get the shoes off? I got to unlace all your shoes. Let me pull off your jeans. It's very clunky and clumsy. And, you know, she's putting her fingers places and, you know, it's not the right place and all this stuff.
Walk in also.
Oh, yeah. And then someone's knocking on the door. So she takes a break after Hope says, let's just cool it. Let's just take it easy for a second. So she grabs a cup right next to her, and she just takes a drink, and it's like filled with cigarettes. So she like picks out cigarettes from her mouth, and she just gets super nauseous and ends up like barfing all over Hope. And Hope's like, that's it. We're done. We're done. And she just says to get out. Like she's showering the vomit off of her as she shoots Amy out of the room. And I was just like, I felt so bad. So then Molly is by herself, and she sees Nick and Ryan hooking up, and she's like totally hurt. And she's just sitting beside herself because her best friend is gone. And then she sits down, and Jared comes with another, I think he's still wearing the same outfit, but I just wanted to call out his like snake on his collar, you know, biblical allusions, maybe. I don't know. Nice. Could be a stretch, but I think I liked that they had this chat and this moment of connection. And he sort of is like, do people really think I like slept with a prostitute? Like I didn't do that. I don't know why people say that. And, I want to design airplanes and I want to plan Broadway musicals. And he says this like lovely line about,
I want to design fucking airplanes. Yeah, get rich off that and then use the cash to produce some new musicals. Enough with the revivals already. It's total bullshit. Audiences deserve something original, I think.
This is the same guy who was like throwing a party on the yacht with the ice sculptures, but he's actually like a semi-deep person and has thoughts. And so the cops show up, and Molly ends up leaving, running out with everyone. And Amy decides that this is her moment. So she distracts the cops and runs out so that everyone can get out of the house. And she makes this sort of diversion. And as Molly's walking down the street, she meets up with AAA, as they call her. She pulls up to the side of the road. They call her AAA because she provides roadside assistance. That's what the other in her class
but
say.
A special type of roadside assistance.
Right, exactly. But it's funny, you think they were going to go sincere. So AAA is explaining to Molly, people always say that I gave him roadside assistance. I mean, I did, but she's like, you want to be sympathetic to her for getting called that nickname. And then she's like, but I did do the things they said, but what's wrong with that? Yeah. Like,
that's what I was talking about in the beginning when I said, the books are not like, you can't judge a book by its cover. Sure. It's not that the book, you open it up and it's the opposite. Yeah. Like the cover gives you a window into the book, but the book is so much deeper than that. And you can be that person from the cover, but also have a lot more depth and, be a person and want to be called something else. Like that's what she said. She's like, when we get to Yale, can you please, refer to me by my actual name?
Yeah. I loved it. I love that it was like, you thought that I wasn't AAA, but I am AAA. But what's wrong with that? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. The next scene we see, Amy getting handcuffed and marched out, and she's saying,
all right, well, just so you know, I know my rights.
Oh my God.
There are more prisons than colleges in the United States. Did you know that? And it costs $71,000 to house an inmate in California. It's more than Harvard. Well, it seems excessive. Shotgun. Just kidding. I don't have one.
To the morning after we wake up, Molly wakes up and she realizes that she's late for her graduation, but she does see all these like messages that Amy was sort of the hero of the class last night because she basically saved this party. So then Molly and Amy have like this heart-to-heart conversation. Molly visits Amy in jail and they have this really nice heart-to-heart conversation, and she ends up snitching on the pizza delivery guy who is, we just found out, is the Valley Strangler. I take umbrage with that, the throwing shade on the Valley, but what can I do? I feel like the Valley is like the butt of jokes in everyone in Hollywood. So I'm calling for a stop. Yeah. All right. Enough. And then the graduation scene, like any good high school movie, it has to end in like an epic graduation scene. So Amy and Molly are late. They're borrowing Jared's like hot rod with this amazing paint job.
You remember what his license plate says?
No. What did it say?
Fuck boy.
Fuck boy.
Yes.
Love it.
Yes. Can I just, please, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I will say that when they get in that car, another great needle drop.
Yeah.
Great
Run the Jewels,
playing.
Right?
Run the Jewels. Exactly. Awesome.
Nice. I mean, do you know that? I do remember that one.
It's a good one.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I thought that the driving scenes were incredible. And then they roll up to the graduation, crashing down the gates. I think Jared starts out giving Molly's speech because she's late. So he's going up there and saying, as a woman, as the valedictorian, kind of just, he's really doing such a nice, like a mitzvah for her, like putting himself out there, kind of embarrassing himself for her. She shows up with Amy. She gets up on stage. She gives him a big kiss. And, she starts her speech, which is, I think she had something prepared, but then she kind of improvises and she thanks everyone for being so great and being able to like be in a class with them and get to know them. I thought it was such a nice scene to kind of wrap up the movie. And then, we kind of end the movie with this drop off scene where Molly is helping Amy pack up for Botswana. Hope shows up and she gives Amy her number. Again, she's just like very awkward and clumsy, and it's like I loved it. It was awesome.
And Molly in the window is so hilarious.
Oh yeah, she's like, yes,
silently
right.
Out is hilarious.
Yep. Amazing stuff. Yeah, it's I felt that all of it going on. I was here for it. The performances in this movie were terrific. I'll say that for the ratings, but I'm just the last part of the movie really is where everyone kind of shines, I thought. And then they go to the airport. They have this like sort of touching scene, and you think that's sort of the end of the movie because everyone's sort of crying and they're parting ways. But then she like runs into her, and then they ask if they want to go have pancakes, and she says, "Fuck yeah!" And then that's how the movie ends. Yeah,
yeah.
She says, "I can be the last one on the plane."
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we're early. We don't.
It would have been, I think, a bridge too far for her to say, "I'm not going." That would have been implausible to me.
Yeah.
I just want to stay here with you. Would have been completely implausible. But just like, let's screw around a little longer because now we're not nerds. Remember, that's the whole thing. Like now, like I gotta be the first.
I don't have to get there early.
I can be the slacker. I can just like roll up at the last minute and be like, "What's up?" And yeah.
Nice. I didn't draw a connection to that, but that's a good one. I'm the nerdy one who likes to show up at the airport really early. Just because I've fallen asleep at the terminal and missed flights before. So I have like a major travel car. I was like dozing off as they're boarding.
Well, then getting to the airport's not the problem.
I'm the problem.
Extra cup of coffee.
Is this like an intervention for me? Is that what this is all about?
That's why we chose this movie. I will say though, just with those last couple scenes, I think the movie does two great, final subversions. You were talking about like every high school movie has to end with a big graduation speech. And of course, this graduation scene has all of the, the fanfare and the car driving in and everyone stands up and cheers for them. But I was very relieved when Molly got up there and gave, like 3 sentences, basically just, you guys were all good people. I'm like, that's it. Like, that doesn't have to be this dramatic, but like what she learned over the course of this movie was, you guys are good people. I looked out on everyone else. You guys are great. And then I think what you're talking about, that last scene at the airport is another subversion. It's like, it feels like very, very, it reminded me of the end of Lady Bird, which Beanie Feldstein was in, a couple years earlier, that has a very intense, dramatic airport scene, before college, like a very similar kind of plays out similarly. And like this movie, it tricks you into thinking it's going there because we see Molly alone in the car and she's getting emotional. And then all of a sudden Amy shows up and she's just like, I'm early for the flight and whatever. It cuts it out, and it's just another great subversion at the end of the film.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back to give our ratings and scores for the film Booksmart. Be right back.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. This week we're discussing Booksmart, and now we're up to the part of the show where we're going to give a ranking to the film in terms of its content, themes, cast and crew, and basically give it a ranking on a scale of 1 to 5 Jewish stars versus how Jewish it is. So, we have 2 guests with us, Ginna and Lynn. Do either of you want to start?
Okay, so content, not explicitly Jewish. No one's in a sukkah.
Right.
There's no like facile jokes about Yiddish, all that stuff. Cast and crew, pretty Jewish. Like, even not explicitly, like, obviously Beanie Feldstein, guy who plays Jared, Noah Galvin nominally, and Miss Fine, we don't know. Right. Like, we don't even really know about Nick, like we don't know. But we know, and this is what I say to my husband all the time about TV shows, no matter whether something's implicit or explicit, depending, I always know, and I am able to turn to him and say there were women in the writer's room.
Exactly.
And in this case, there were Jews in the writer's room.
Exactly.
But what to me is what makes this film so supremely Jewish goes back to what I was sort of talking around earlier, which is that, you know, these two girls, and especially Molly, she is especially, you know, we're surmising that her character is Jewish. She's the quintessential outsider in the way that she's like not skinny, not blonde, bookish, whatever. But she's still not, from the beginning, not a total outsider, still the outside in balance. And by the end, everyone has kind of figured out how to accept each other. So to me, this is the journey of, you know, contemporary, at least Ashkenazi Judaism. This is it. Like, this is, you know, 120 years after the Great Migration. We've kind of, not perfect, but we've kind of figured out mainstream integration, and it looks like this high school on graduation.
Right. And for the thousands of years before we figured that out, that was still the struggle. How to be outside and inside, how to do it well without getting killed, right? How to do it, being able to thrive. So like that struggle, that was the struggle for so much time before we got to this point. So I 100% agree with Lynn. And, you know, the point, women in the writer's room, it was so clear to me that there were Jews writing this, even before you could have figured that out even without knowing, but very clearly just like that felt really spot on and identifiable to me. So even though explicit Jewishness was not super high, you know, like Lynn said, no one's in a sukkah, no references to the Chagim, right? Like that wasn't happening, but it just felt sort of Jewish through and through.
And thematically, or like you said, content wise, it didn't ring true for, you know, it didn't ring so Jew, I should say.
For plot points,
Plot and explicit references.
Any thoughts on like Jewish themes from both of you?
Well, I mean, if you want to, you know, get sort of, it's not stereotypical necessarily, but if you know, certainly like the value of study, right? The fact that they were bookworms was not devalued.
Right.
It's just their lane. And that goes back to the movie Loving Them, you know, and this is a little bit of a laborious comparison, but you know,
that's our podcast.
That's the title of my next podcast, laborious.
Should be.
So Ginna, you remind me of this, and you know, it is true that, like, you know, let's say, for example, in Jews in you know, medieval Europe were both insiders and outsiders, right? They were like the king's doctors, and the king. They handled the king's money and all that stuff, like by day, right? And by night, you know, they threw stones at them on Easter or whatever. So it's not that, you know, it's their bookishness and the treasurer thing with the principal. You know, there we go. There's my laborious comparison.
No, there you go.
But it's not. But they're not. But there's no by night. They're not actively shunned or rejected. So that's what I'm saying about like the evolution of, you know, before, like, you know, medieval Europe and before, you know, the Great Migration. This is all of history right now, real quick. And now, I really think it's, I don't know if the Jews in the writer's room were like, hey, let's make this an analogy or a you know, let's make this parallel to a Jewish journey. But to me, it really does.
Ginna, anything thematically that we haven't covered?
I don't think that we haven't covered. Y'all have been like such able stewards of this conversation.
What nerds is what we're saying in the
basically.
Best way.
I come on my own podcast to be called a nerd. Flashbacks to high school.
Yeah, but nerds are cool now. Nerds are cool now.
That's the point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Proud to be one.
They say
Harry, how about yourself? Where are you landing?
I agree with a lot of what's already been said. I mean, we talk about cast and crew. There's definitely a little bit of Jewishness in there, and this whole concept of Jews in the writers' room. There literally were. We confirm that, but also exactly what you're saying. Like it really felt like it. Like, content. I kind of agree on what was said. Nothing so explicit. I kind of pulled some like, oh, there's like a reference to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like claim that as like a Jewishness, and like little touches here and there that like, and even just like the portrayal of certain actors. We spoke about what's their friend's name? Jared. Thank you. We spoke about Jared, and like he definitely reads his Jewishness in a way that I think invades some of the, I would call that part of the text, the content of the film, but it is thematically where I definitely see a lot of it. Like I love the point. I think Lynn, you were making it just about like, contemporary, like Jews kind of working their way into contemporary society and kind of like lending into both fronts. So it's not a movie about people that are so bookish and, book smart, so to speak, abandoning that in favor of being these partiers. And, they didn't both drop out of college and commit to a life of just partying and frivolity and like friends. Like it really is about a very healthy integration. I mean, that's the movie tells us that so early on when we discover that all these other, like we said, the jock types are all in great schools too. Like that, they give us our end goal right away, because it's like, you can have both and you can be a modern Jew. You can be an American Jew. You could be a Jewish American. You can kind of incorporate both of those. And I really do think that thematically, like Jews in the writer's room, like that's a perspective that's in some ways born out of an experience with that, an experience of, having your faith, your culture, your Jewishness, and also, existing as a writer in Hollywood. So I really saw that in there, and I'll jump. We can save. I think we should save our ratings, for the end, sort of go back to back to back, so people can keep track of. We've got 4 different ratings. There's a lot going on.
Right.
So before I give the number exactly, Daniel, why don't you tell us how you felt about content, cast, themes?
For sure. Yeah, I think cast and crew, y'all have already mentioned quite a few of the cast members are Jewish. I did look up Olivia Wilde is not Jewish. She's of English and Scottish descent. And
she's 1/64th Sephardic Jewish, actually.
Whoa.
I went to the library and
Team Sephardic.
You did your research. I appreciate that.
Yep.
I'll take the 64th. That works. We'll count it. All right. So then I'm changing my rating based on that new information. Breaking news. I think content, like y'all said, there's not too much in the way of Jewishness. Although someone said that nobody was praying, but we don't know for sure that at Nick's house party that no one wasn't praying off in the corner. Maybe there was a minion that we didn't see going on.
Was it a Friday night?
That's why we didn't see it.
Was it Friday? Was the last day of school Friday and it was that night?
Feels like it could have been.
Maybe it was Kabbalat Shabbat.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what they were doing. We don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, we can give a point to every single movie we've ever discussed by that logic, but I'll allow it this what take the star.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think thematically, this sort of that what everyone has been saying so far has been spot on about just like fitting in, not fitting in, and trying your best to assimilate. I don't know. I read some kind of assimilation in there where it's like you kind of have to dive in here, and you give away a little bit of what you held to be uniquely yours, but it isolates you a little bit. And that's like the struggle of modern Orthodoxy. You want to be Orthodox, but you also want to be modern. That sort of tension is inherent in the title. So as someone who does that a little bit, it's a tricky situation, but I would also say, nothing super explicitly Jewish, but the themes are there. I also wanted to call out, I'm a big fan of the stretches. So like the mikvah stuff, the supernatural, Gigi, Jared, like we talked about.
Love it.
It's all there. It's all subtext, but I think it's there. So with that, maybe I'll start us off with some numbers. I'm going to probably go like 2 stars as far as Jewishness. Ginna, how about yourself?
This is a classic Libra move. I was going to go 2 3/4 stars.
Okay. 2.75.
Almost 3 stars.
Got it. So more Jewish than not.
More Jewish than not.
Okay. Harry?
It's so funny. I came in here with a score in my mind that I was just like, everyone's going to come in so glowingly. We've just spoken so much about the Jewishness. People are going to throw out their 3.5s, their 4s, their 4.5s. And I can't wait to be like the heel with my lower score. And without giving it away, because I might change it in the next 15 seconds, I definitely was going to be higher than both of you, because the Jews in the writer room argument, we mentioned it a bunch, like there definitely is
Olivia
a Jewish
Wilde.
sensibility. 164th Jewish. Yeah, that might give me, I'll add a 1/64th of a star to my, to whatever my ranking was going to be. But I definitely it is hard to make the sort of more Jewish than not, because, the question that we were going to ask after this is, good or bad for the Jews. And the prerequisite for that question is always like, is this an obviously Jewish movie? If you're watching this as a Jew, if you're watching this as someone who isn't Jewish, like, are you reading this as Jewish? And the truth is, I'm not so sure, but I do think that it's not unfair to see Molly's character and definitely Jared's character as being sort of Jewish representation. So, I don't want to go too high. I'll stick with my gut. I'm going to go 3 stars at 3 1/64 stars for my Jewish scores out of 5 Jewish stars.
That's my joke. That's my joke. And my score. Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate, or should we just slot it as both of us?
That's it. I fold.
Okay.
All right. So 2, 3 and a 64th. That's the first and second time anyone's ever given a 64th of a score to Jews on film. Yeah.
Lynn, do you want a little bit more context around your rating, or did Harry steal your joke entirely?
Well, he stole my joke, but I have a similar argument, that it's well, part of it is why I think it's good for the Jews, but we'll get to that. But I do think, because we live in a world where Jews are, visible yet assimilated in many ways. I do think that for a movie to have Jewish content, or for characters to feel Jewish, is not an experience limited to Jews.
That's so interesting. Yes.
So like, I mean, I'm scooping myself a little bit, because that's partly what I want to say about why it's good for the Jews. But what I mean in this context is that's why I think in this day and age, and because of what I believe is part of the takeaway part of the metaphor of the film, whether intentional or not, that's why I believe that there can be more Jewishness in a film than we think, that is recognizable not only to Jews.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because I feel like the reason why I didn't go like to 3.5 Magen Davids is that, like, because I think that in order to see some of what we have seen and discussed, there does need to be an element of a Jewish experience. Like, I think that non-Jews watching it would not pick up on these things. And so that to me, that would have been, if there were a couple more like, crumbs to explicit Jewishness, then that would have been what knocked it over.
Yeah. If you want to, I feel like we should just ask the question right now, good or bad for the Jews, if you want to just weigh in, because we're covering it already. So overall, good for the Jews, bad for the Jews, or kind of like you're saying, who's really going to watch this and, kind of weigh in on that, right?
I think it's good for the Jews, because I agree with you, Ginna, that like some of my, like, all due respect to my, extremely preppy friends from high school, I also went to prep school and was totally a sort of a Beanie Feldstein character, like both of these girls, like not the cool one, but not uncool, like fine. Yeah. Completely understood that felt this exact insider outsider status. Yep. Couldn't play lacrosse, but was invited to parties. I don't think, with all due respect, that, to my preppy friends, that they're not going to figure out like, oh, it's a metaphor for the Jews who were doctors in the Middle Ages. Like, it's not anyway, but I do think that anybody who has been conscious in the United States, in the circles that we have been in, that I myself have been in, and consumed the media that has been mainstream, for anyone to not even subconsciously, anyone in that milieu, to not subconsciously sort of grok that the Beanie Feldstein character is Jewish and the Jared character is Jewish, like they read Jewish. Right. And there is such a minority, forgive the expression, of movies that are not insulting to those same characters in other settings, like that guy. And the nerd. And also, side note, this is not about being Jewish, but like, how far have we come since Election, which I also love, but not kind to Tracy Flick, right? Yep. That's the name, right? So that's side note, total side note, different podcast, but different episode, but like, you just can't sit there and not at some level in your cells absorb that those characters are Jewish, and they are so likable and so sympathetic that you then also can't not absorb that you like them and can't not absorb that someone's messing with those stereotypes and not subverting as we've agreed, but expanding or giving, dimension to. And so then you walk out feeling a little bit better about the Jews.
I think you give people a lot of credit, Lynn, though. I think you're giving people
in their sense. If you like Booksmart, also, if you like this movie.
I mean, yes, and I appreciate the way. I appreciate you saying like in this milieu, because there's a lot of people in this country who are not.
Definitely.
And so I think that that's part of what I'm wrestling with is that, yes, people we know, people who we know, right? Like, yes, I think that that's true, but that's not most of the country. No. But that said, still think that this movie is definitely not bad for the Jews and is probably neutral because of that factor that like folks who might pick up on these things are already picking up on them and know it and have absorbed some of this. And if you don't know to pick up on them, exactly.
Right.
You're not going to.
What do you think?
Yeah, I like before, I agree with what was said before me for sure. I agree that this movie, and Lynn, you helped me really appreciate just how kind it is to all of its characters. And I don't think that's exclusively the Jewish characters in the film, although like you said, like we can obviously read them as Jewish, but everyone, I mean, we've been saying it since the beginning of the episode, all of these
with the exception of the Valley Strangler. He's the one sort of, yeah.
But you know what? He was such a nice guy in the car. He wore them. He said, he
didn't kill him.
Right? Exactly. He said, like, I'll let you guys out. And he taught them lessons about, and he gave them good tips on how, not to get themselves killed.
And then they snitched on him. So
exactly. A little bit of Rahmanas. But I think everyone in the character, like, especially these, you're coming in with this lens, this lens from film history of just, these high school caricatures, and every single one of them is dealt so kindly, and no one, like, maybe unrealistically so, but you don't really get anyone that has like at least an intentional dark side. Obviously implicitly there's some bad stuff, and we've spoken about the Gigi sort of, force feeding drugs to people, which is, by no means an okay thing to do. Right. But I really think that this movie washes them with such a kind heart. But that's sort of where I agree with you, Ginna, where it's like, is it so obvious that like who would really walk away from this? And I think you would walk away from this and say, bookish, nerdy people and other people in high school, like all are really good, deep people. And if that translates to Jews, and if subconsciously you're reading some of these characters as Jews, and it's like, I'm not going to judge any of these people that I encounter in high school or as high schoolers, I think there's a little bit of good in there. So I would say, we don't usually use a scale for this, but it's almost like 60% good for the Jews in the sense that it's not quite neutral, but a little more. I know I don't want to introduce numbers. It'll complicate
it's like more numbers.
Also, as someone who I think grew into being a party animal from I'm a bookworm and a party animal. I really appreciate these characters and their own journey. Like, it's important.
Absolutely.
Everything in moderation, including moderation.
That's right.
I like that.
100%. Yeah. I think, for me, I think I could go a lot of different ways. I think if you're reading it like, super subtextual and you are identifying that Beanie, Feldstein, and Jared are Jewish characters, which for the purposes of this podcast is not such a stretch. They are coded Jewish, as we like to say on the pod. I think, it's like everyone, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, which I know Harry and Ginna you'll like because I said records. But I think it's fine. I think, there's no negative associations with anyone. Like most movies, they have sort of a story and what am I trying to say? They have a character arc, right? So they develop. Initially, we start out in a certain way, and then by the end, we're a little bit more fully formed and more. You have multiple facets to your personality. So I think overall, it's like a fine portrayal for the Jews. But yeah.
The first time I saw Booksmart, I was on a plane, and it was so cute. Like, not ideal because it's tiny and you want to, Sure. But I noticed, I forget like the chronology, but I noticed that another woman in my aisle, in my row, was also watching it. And I honestly forget who said this to the other, but whoever finished it second, like whoever the other one turned to and said, and like across the road and went like, wasn't that amazing?
It's awesome.
Especially women, like women love this. I have to say, like, I can't paint us all with a totally broad brush, but like it is so goddamn refreshing.
Yeah,
sure.
You know, to be like that Malala nerd and just see yourself and other women not just being the slutty one, the dumb one, the this, the that. You know, like I cannot tell you. It was just a breath of fresh everything.
Yeah, definitely. Like this sort of, I mean, it's safe to say that this is like a really nice, like feminist high school movie. I feel like,
Absolutely.
You know, I think Clueless, not so much. I feel like it's very dated too. Like the whole, like her falling in love with her stepbrother, whatever. We won't get into it. You can listen to that podcast.
It's dated. It's cute, but it's dated. Or Moxie. Yeah. I like Moxie also, but it's so on the nose, you know, and it was just like, I'm like, you know, good effort, Moxie, but it didn't feel it. I didn't feel it in my soul as just,
well, it's like we were talking about, you know, to bring this back to the very first conversation we had, you know, when we were talking about like Jewish movies that like will show Jewishness, but we'll show it like, the guy with payas is like, you know, giving tzedakah or whatever. But like, and that's, I think, what Moxie is. But this movie just like, let's, you know, like you're saying, lets its women, lets its characters just have their own story without making a point of how
this we are. Look how that we are. Yeah, totally. So Lynn, Ginna, thank you so much for being here on Jews on Film to discuss Booksmart.
Thank you for giving us the chance to live that movie.
This was a ton of fun.
I wanted to ask if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about the Bintel Brief podcast.
Oh, yes. So Bintel Brief is the Forward's foray into bringing its long-lived advice column into the modern era. So Lynn and I are the co-hosts, but we answer questions from everyday people, and we go back into the archives with our archivist, Hannah Pollock, too. So we spend some time grappling with folks' questions, and then we bring in some history, too. And we just wrapped up season 2. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Lovely.
If you want, you can just like binge listen your way through both seasons. But I also know that they've highlighted certain episodes that touch on certain themes for the high holidays.
Oh, nice.
So such as, you know, including tshuva and like just, you know, just relevant themes. And they're really theme heavy. I will say, just a plug to build on what Ginna was saying. I think my personal favorite thing about the podcast is the history that Ginna was talking about, where we read and discuss a problem submitted by someone current, but then Hannah Pollock, the Forward's brilliant archivist, brings up a letter from the past that on its face may not look like it has anything to do with the letter from the present day, but when we dig in, we find out it does. And, you know, even a modern day letter about high schoolers playing Dungeons and Dragons. She found a letter from high schoolers in 1921 playing Dungeons and
that would be amazing.
Found a letter with a theme that really meshed beautifully. And so like it's full of, you know, I hope, you know, warm and thoughtful advice, but also history and also surprises.
Yeah. And that is what makes us one of the 11 best podcasts out there, according to Lifehacker, might I add, while we're plugging Bintel.
That's amazing. Wow. Yep. Congratulations. You should have started with that at the beginning of the podcast. We would have approached this very differently. You know? All right. Well, thanks so much. We'll definitely put a link to the podcast in the show notes. And Lynn and Ginna, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and all those things. And I'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye. Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Harry Ottensasser and Daniel Zana. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.